Hi everybody, give me 1 second. Okay, hi there. I know I'm not shirtless. This shirt just really washes me out. Hi everybody. I know I haven't streamed in a while, and that's because of laziness. I am a fat lazy bitch. Yeah, sorry. Anyways, today we are actually going to be watching a, true crime video by Call Me Kris. If you probably already know who she is, her name is Kelmiris. I really like her true crime content, and I know that for some people it's upsetting. Saying that like that's my favorite true crime. That's my favorite true crime case and stuff. I can understand how that would be upsetting, and I can understand how some people would feel as if it's objectifying to the victims and the families of the victims. Personally, I see it as a retribution, a way to bring light to their cases, a way to make sure that it can never happen again to anybody. There's a bird on my window. Hi, Mr. Birdie. He goes up there a lot. Like, Jesus Christ. Anyways, I see it as retribution. Like, if I were to go through something, say, as I can't remember her last name, but Nedra. She was kidnapped at birth and raised, and subsequently she was never killed. She was okay, and she had no idea that she was missing. She was never harmed. She was just under the impression that she was safe and in her house, and that was true for the majority of her life until she found out that she was kidnapped as an infant. So, yeah. And I believe that it's important to, like, tell these stories. That way there's no way that, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I think it's important to tell these stories to people so that there's no way that it could ever happen again, or that people can be more cautious. And I know the world is a dangerous place with thousands of ways to die. Nowhere is safe, not even in your own home, but it's safer than being outside, I suppose. Either way, Call Me Kris. She is doing a video right now on John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown. Personally, I don't like, what the fuck? Okay. Personally, I don't, I don't want to look at that one quickly. Okay. Personally, I believe that killers should not be given a name by the media. Personally, I believe that a lot of serial killers are often narcissistic and like being given a name. Like, take Gary Ridgway, for example, the Green River Killer. Not the police. The media called him the media called him the Green River Killer because he dumped 3 or 2 bodies in the Green River, obviously. And that swayed police into thinking that that's just where he was dumping his victims. And he was subsequently went on to kill a few more people, and their ending was sad. And personally, I believe that we should familiarize ourselves with the victims' names and not the killers that don't deserve the light of day. Timothy Jack McCoy is a victim of John Wayne Gacy, as is John Bukovich. And there are still a very large portion of unidentified victims that were in John Wayne Gacy's care. Francis Wayne Alexander wasn't identified until February 1975, about a year after the whole crimes. There's Daryl Sampson. All of these young men were teenagers. Samuel Stapleton, Randall Refferett, Michael Bonin, they were Bonin, okay. But they were all just teenagers. William Carroll, victim number 26. An unidentified white male, 5'2" to 5'6", and disappeared between June 1976 and August 6th, 1976. And it's genuinely heartbreaking to see that people just, like, didn't know that they didn't went missing, or they clearly didn't have anybody for them who went missing. And it's genuinely discerning. Jimothy Hawkinson was very lucky. And on August 5th of 1976, he had arrived in Chicago and called his mother for their last conversation before John Wayne Gacy killed him. And that's genuinely heartbreaking. I would physically, I would have a heartbreak. Like, literally, I would break down crying if my daughters, which I don't have any daughters right now, but I do plan on having daughters. If my daughters were to just get killed by some maniac who decides that he's angry at the world. But this isn't my rant based off of psychological, political, and just controversial views on serial killers and their psychopathy. This is a video on Kris. So she is doing a video on John Wayne Gacy. So I guess we can just see what she's up to now.
In the late 1970s, in a quiet suburb called Des Plaines, Illinois, concealed a nightmare. Behind the smile of a well-liked businessman and part-time clown lurked a predator whose crimes would horrify the nation. John Wayne Gacy wasn't just a trusted neighbor. He was a serial killer who buried his victims beneath his own home. And when investigators uncovered...
Okay, that is a thing I did know about John Wayne Gacy, is that he did bury his victims underneath his house. And I'm pretty sure there was over 40 remains, all from young men, which is genuinely just, like, terrifying to think of. It's honestly just scary.
Covered the truth. It shattered the illusion of safety and redefined the face of evil. This is a story of how a troubled child became one of America's most infamous serial killers, and why his legacy still haunts us today. Known by all now as the Killer Clown. Crime, conspiracy, cults, serial killers, and murder. All things that I love to consume, and I know you do too, you sick, beautiful, intellectually minded freak. And today we are talking about just that monstrous POS person, John Wayne Gacy. A lot of you recommended I do this, so you get what you wish for. So without further ado, let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 down the highway, slam on the brakes, and bust through this windshield into this killer clown case together.
Sorry, I was gonna say I love the whole. I was muted. Okay. I love the whole heart she has with it and shit. She's a very like funny. I like her a lot. She's like so like. How do I say it? Like genuine? Is that like a good way to put it? But yeah, this is just like a very interesting topical matter, where like, yeah, John Wayne Gacy. We know him as the Killer Clown. Personally, I don't like that. I don't think he should. He is a giant clown, and as she said, he is a piece of shit. And I don't think he should have ever been given the time of day. But I digress, so let's move on, I guess.
John.
Okay, that is a disclaimer at the beginning of the video, so I will say this will have very upsetting topics in it. So if you are sensitive to anything that happens here, if you're sensitive to any, like, sexual abuse or, any, like, torture or very gruesome details, I suggest you, find a different video to click on them, because this is definitely not for the faint of heart. So, yeah.
Wayne Gacy's early life was marked by a tumultuous family dynamic and personal struggles that would later shape his psychological development down the road. Born on March 7th.
And that's definitely an interesting topic as well. Criminal psychology. Something I've actually taught myself a little something in. Cause like, I'm just a giant fucking nerd. You should know this by now. I am a giant nerd. And psychology is a very big thing in my opinion. I have what's called ASPD, which if you don't know, it means antisocial personality disorder. And the words sociopath or psychopath are no longer a thing. So, if someone can never be deemed a psychopath by today's psychology standards, or a sociopath, I am rendered a sociopath by nurture, if you know what that is. I'm not going to get into details. But yeah, there's just a lot of things. I can't physically express empathy. It's just very. It's all very interesting. I suggest like adapting yourself if you want to learn about psychology, especially criminal psychology. It's interesting what makes these people tick.
1942 in Chicago, Illinois. Gacy was the second of 3 children and the only son of John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robinson. His father, a World War I veteran, struggled with alcoholism and subjected young John to frequent verbal and physical abuse.
That's also something else. I'm holding my microphone now, so if I'm much clearer, I'm going to try to be quiet. That's also a very big thing. I'm not going to say a lot, because there's definitely serial killers who have been in well-adjusted homes, but a vast majority of serial killers have experienced some sort of sexual or physical abuse from a parent or a trusted one. And it's genuinely disheartening to see that there's almost nothing they can do besides just doing all that. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought I heard somebody. Whenever I start like diving into criminal stuff like this, I always get really paranoid. Here's my cat. I use that as a lumbar pillow. Okay. And I just kind of like flop back. It's funny. Okay. But yeah, it's genuinely disheartening to see that so many people just like are refused and ignored mental health facilities. It's genuinely hard to get mental health, especially if you are somebody like me who didn't grow up with the most amount of money, who had to boil water to take a bath, who there's a lot of things that a lot of people have done in my position and to survive, just to do things that in our daily hygienists. And I went to a privileged ass school. I was in the free lunch program, and I have a job now, and I'm not perfectly happy with where I am currently, but hopefully that changes. Not to trauma dump. Anyways, it's very concerning, and that's what I'm just trying to say. So.
And this abusive relationship just set a precedent for the toxic dynamic that would persist throughout Gacy's childhood and adolescence. And the paternal abuse Gacy endured was not merely sporadic. It was a constant presence in his formative years. Not a good start. His father consistently belittled him and drew unfavorable comparisons between John and his sisters. And this persistence of degradation had a very profound impact on Gacy's self-esteem and his perception of masculinity. And one particularly poignant incident occurred when Gacy was just 4 years old. His father would beat him for accidentally disarranging car engine components, an event that Gacy would recall as one of his earliest childhood memories. And this incident just exemplified the harsh and unforgiving nature of his father's treatment, which often centered around perceived failures and inadequacies. So just the first ingredient in our serial killer stew, okay? Nature, nurture, nurture, bad. But in contrast to his father's cruelty, Gacy's mother, Marion Elaine Robinson, attempted to shield her son from the abuse, so that's good, at least. However, this protective behavior inadvertently fostered a deep-seated resentment in Gacy towards both his father and expectations placed upon him. And the dichotomy between his parents' treatment created a very complex emotional landscape for the young Gacy, one that would influence his interpersonal relationship and psychological psychological development in the years to come. And Gacy's childhood would be further complicated by a series of health issues. He developed a heart condition that led to frequent hospitalizations, and rather than his father offering him support, like a good dad does, his father just accused him of feigning illness for attention, just deepening the rift between the two. And this lack of paternal empathy,
being constantly degraded or being treated as something less than what you are, can have severe psychological breakage, especially if you are already prone to outbreaks like that. Like, let's say your family has a history of mental issues, then that would I keep saying that would increase the risk of psychopathy, especially in his case. While he was also abused verbally and physically by his father, at least he had one caring parent, his mother, which was very interesting. It's just all very interesting, especially if you look at it from somebody who is diagnosed with ASPD. So, when you have mental health issues, there's definitely a way that people look at you. There's definitely people who say, you're too young to have that diagnosis. You haven't been through what I've been through. You don't know what I've had to do. That's all very well and done, and people do go through their own separate traumas. But that doesn't mean you have the right to degrade and belittle somebody else's trauma for what they went through. I may have went through something that was deeply traumatizing to me and which affected my ability to feel empathy, while you may have just gotten a slap on the wrist for something that you did. It's all just very complicated.
Empathy during times of physical vulnerability likely contributed to Gacy's feeling of isolation and inadequacy. And the extent of Gacy's health problems became more pronounced during his teenage years. Between the ages of 14 and 18, he spent nearly a year in hospitals due to unexplainable blackouts and a burst appendix. Kid had it rough, before he was in...
Appendicitis is no joke. Stepping away from my professional psychoanalysis, appendicitis fucking hurts, and it's hard to diagnose yourself. Never diagnose yourself, please. Obviously go get help if you need it, but what I mean by that is having appendicitis is just a sharp or acute pain in your right lower quadrant of your abdomen. And usually some people just put it off oh, it's just a stomach ache, it's just something I ate, it's blah, 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 blah. And it can be commonly overlooked and, in a lot of cases, very deadly. Honestly, I have no idea why we have appendixes. Actually, that's not true. Evolution rendered it useless, but let me just continue.
Absolute monster POS that deserves to be in hell. Do feel bad for the kid, And these prolonged periods of hospitalizations really affected his education and social development. So the physical ailments combined with the emotional trauma of his home life just created the perfect storm of psychological stress during his formative years. And at the age 17, Gacy would experience another traumatic event that would have a far-reaching consequence for his psychological well-being. He would unfortunately be SA'd by a family member.
Sexual assault is unfortunately very common in the United States, and it's genuinely terrible that has to happen. What was I saying? It's genuinely terrible that sexual assault is something that is so common in the United States, and it happens a lot. And victims, especially women, since female victims make up 98% of them, are almost always, not almost always, but some of them are scared to come to terms with it. They're scared to go be put on the witness stand, to be accused that they're lying, to have slander under their name. And I'm not saying that men can't be victims of sexual assault as well, as I was, but it's less common, and that is something that I am so lucky to be a man for. Apart from that one time, which was an offshoot, and I did make it out, I have never been sexually objectified by anybody. And I am very grateful for that. And I know I am a very lucky person to not have to worry when I go outside in the middle of the night. I know that I can wear headphones when I go on a run. I don't have to walk around my house blind for the first 15 minutes so that somebody doesn't know where I live. I can walk by trees. I can walk by a bush. It's all very complicated survival methods that women have to do just to stay alive, which is ridiculous.
Experience he would actually never disclose to his parents. So this, just combined with everything, all the hospitalizations and all the treatment of his parents, was just a recipe for disaster. Just another ingredient in the serial killer stew, if you will. But despite the abuse, the medical issues, and the SA, Gacy actually managed to maintain close relationships with his mother and his sisters, Karen and Joanne. And these familial connections provided him with some emotional support during his tumultuous childhood and adolescence. However, these positive influences in his life would not outweigh the bad. It just gets bad from here. And as Gacy entered adulthood, the effects of his troubled childhood began to manifest in complex and disturbing ways. The manipulative tendencies and violent impulses that would later characterize his criminal actions can be traced back to these formative experiences. And Gacy's childhood would also shape his interactions with authority figures and his desire for approval. As he grew older, he developed a keen ability to present a facade of normalcy to the outside world, a skill that would later enable him to be able to commit these crimes and get away with it for a very long time. So in 1960, at the age of 18, he ventured into the world of politics, where all good people come from. I love politicians. Working as an assistant precinct captain of a local Democratic Party candidate. And although this sounds like a really cool, impressive job, it was not met with approval from his father. Still, this guy still can't get approval from his father. He just completely dismissed his son's efforts by labeling him as a patsy. And the criticism just further strained their already tumultuous relationship and underscored the ongoing tension between Gacy and his father. So at this point, seeking a change of scenery, Gacy relocated to Las Vegas in 1962. And there he found employment in an ambulance service before transitioning to a position as a mortuary attendant. The irony is palpable. And it was during this time at the mortuary that Gacy had a disturbing encounter that would leave a lasting impact on his psyche. He would come into contact with the deceased body of a young teenage boy. And in a moment of profound disturbance, he would embrace and caress the corpse. And this experience left Gacy in a state of shock and pleasure, and may have been the pivotal moment in the development of his later pathological behavior. And then,
as far as I knew, John Wayne Gacy never committed what's the word? Necrophilia. As far as I knew, he was a necrophiliac, but that could change here. I did not know that he caressed a dead body on the side of the road, so.
upon returning back to Chicago, Gacy demonstrated a drive of self-improvement and professional advancement. Despite not having completed high school, he enrolled in Northwestern Business College and successfully graduated in 1963. And the achievement completely opened doors for him. It secured management trainee position with the Nunn Bush Shoe Company, where he began to showcase his business abilities. And the year 1964 marked as a significant turning point in Gacy's life. He married Marilyn Myers, a coworker of his, and relocated to Springfield, Illinois, where he excelled both in his career and community involvement. And rising through the ranks of the Springfield JCs, a civic organization, Gacy would eventually be named the vice president and would be recognized as being the third most outstanding JC in Illinois, whatever that means. So this period of his life just exemplified Gacy's ability to present a facade of normalcy and success to the outside world, a skill that would come in handy as he delved into the world of killing. And it was during the time that he was with the JCs, Gacy would experience another pivotal moment in his sexual development. And this moment would be a homosexual encounter with a colleague. And this event would mark a significant point in Gacy's life as he grappled with his sexual identity, a struggle that would just continue to influence his actions in those years to come. And I'm not at all saying that homosexuality led him to do these things that he's about to do in any way, shape, or form, obviously. obviously. But him questioning his sexual identity led him to
Yes.
confusing roadblocks in his already very confusing mind, and obviously odd fixation with dead bodies. Glad we cleared that up. Let's continue. But Gacy's ability
So he is a necrophiliac. Okay. Let's keep going.
to maintain a respectable public image while harboring deviant impulses is a classic example of a psychological concept of masking in sociopaths specifically. He became very well liked in his community, hosting large summer parties that attracted hundreds of guests, including politicians and business associates. And these social gatherings just reinforced his image as a community-minded individual, a good guy, if you will, all while concealing his growing criminal tendencies. However, Gacy's carefully constructed facade began to crumble in 1968 when he was arrested for essaying a teenage boy named Donald Voorhees. So
That's interesting. Name John Gacy, number sodomy, yeah. That's interesting. Color. Okay. That's very interesting, as a lot of serial killers do not start out with killing. They actually progress to that point, which is a very interesting partake in criminal psychology. It's just all very just deep.
this incident would mark Gacy's first criminal conviction and resulted in a 10-year prison sentence at the Anamosa State Penitentiary. But despite the severity of the crime, Gacy served only 18 months before being released early for good behavior. That's crazy! That's like 1/10, a little over 1/10 of the sentence. That's crazy. And it would be a decision that would have tragic consequences for years to come. And the impact of the conviction on Gacy's personal life was immediate and severe. His marriage completely dissolved, with the divorce being finalized while he was still incarcerated. Womp womp. So this marked the end of Gacy's relationship with his wife and children, whom he would actually never see again, which is for the best. So the loss of his family and his reputation in the community he worked so hard to cultivate likely just exacerbated Gacy's psychological instability. And reports suggest that during the time that he was in prison, Gacy's criminal tendencies continued to just manifest. I mean, the guy was just surrounded by criminals. How could they not? He allegedly even tried to hire a hitman to eliminate his accuser, who was Donald Voorhees, the teenage boy, though his plan luckily and ultimately failed. And the incident just provides insights into Gacy's growing disregard for human life and his own willingness to resort to extreme measures to protect himself. So upon his release from prison in 1970, John Wayne Gacy returned to Chicago, where he initially resided with his mother. And this marked the beginning of
Just a little fun tidbit. H. Howard Holmes was also in Chicago with the New World's Theater, I think it was, or New World Hotel, where he had very complicated killing methods. I suggest looking him up. He's a very interesting person.
Of a period of remarkable success and public acclaim for Gacy despite his criminal history, which is crazy. In 1971, he established PDM Contractors, a construction business that quickly flourished. And Gacy's entrepreneurship and charisma allowed him to build a respectable reputation within his community, effectively concealing his very dark impulses. And as he began to become more financially stable, he could purchase a home in Des Plaines, Illinois, or
Shit, not anymore, ho. No. Honey, you know how hard somebody has to work nowadays to even put a down payment on a house, let alone buy one in full. Holy.
Des Plaines, Illinois for the French. You're welcome. And the year 1972 proved to be a very pivotal point for Gacy. He married Carol Hoff, a divorcee with 2 daughters, further solidifying his image as a reformed, upstanding citizen, which, like, looking at it now, he absolutely just did that for the image. I imagine he didn't give a flying shit about anybody that was around him. He just used people. And Gacy would immerse himself into community activities, volunteering for political campaigns, and performing as Pogo the Clown.
That creepy ass fucking bitch.
The Thing of Nightmares, at local events. And his involvement in these pursuits served to reinforce his public persona.
When YouTube asks me, is this for children? I'm gonna say, yeah, this is definitely for children. Oh shit. Put this on YouTube Kids.
As a benevolent and civic-minded individual. But alas, he was a sick-minded individual. But that picture
That he
of the
is.
clown is locked in my nightmares. But
Oh,
in
honey.
1972, he would finally start to crumble into his violent tendencies. He would commit his first murder. And the victim was Timothy McCoy, a 16-year-old hitchhiker whom Gacy had picked up at the bus station.
How unfortunate that someone my age, actually, I am 16, unfortunately lost their fate at that age. And hitchhiking is very dangerous for both parties. But it is genuinely disheartening. And I like the fact that Kris, if you want to look at her page, it's right here. That Kris actually familiarizes herself with the victims. Obviously, we know John Wayne Gacy's name, but it's much better to know the victims. It's better to honor their lives rather than the person who killed them. It's genuinely just... I keep saying the word genuine.
Gacy would lure McCoy to his home under the pretense of offering him a place to stay for the night. And in the early hours of the morning, Gacy would stab McCoy to death in his kitchen. And later, Gacy would claim that he killed him in self-defense, asserting that McCoy had attacked him with a knife. And this incident, however, marked the beginning of Gacy's killing spree, which would continue for the next 6 years. And the second murder would take place around January 1974, and this victim remains unidentified. All we know is that the person was strangled and placed in Gacy's closet before being moved to the crawl space after the body began to decompose. And all of this specific information was given as testimony by Gacy himself. And the third victim, John Butkovic, would be 18 years old at the time of his disappearance on July 31st, 1975. And John had been working for John Wayne Gacy since the age of 16. And shortly before his disappearance, Gacy and Butkovic were having money issues. And on July 30th, John and 3 friends went to Gacy's home, threatening to beat Gacy up if he didn't pay John the $300 that he was owed. Just beat him up. Beat him up, get some baseball bats, beat him up. But instead of paying him, Gacy let the 4 boys smoke weed and drink beers at his house. And after a while, the boys left, and eventually, later that day, Gacy encountered John, waving him down at his car. And following this interaction, Gacy convinced John to get into his car, and he would take him back to his home. And as soon as the 2 men would enter the home, John B. began to yell at Gacy, demanding his check, because beers and weed didn't cut it. And Gacy would then do his later on MO, and he would cuff John B. with handcuffs, and he would tell him once he calmed down, he would take the cuffs off. However, John B. began to threaten Gacy, saying that if Gacy cut the cuffs off him, he would kill him. And from there, his fate was sealed. Gacy would make John sit on his chest, and he would lay next to him, and eventually, he would just strangle him. And Gacy would plan on stashing his body in the crawl space, but his family came home, forcing him to bury John B. under the garage. And following his disappearance, the Butkovits pushed for police to investigate Gacy further, but nothing was ever done, unfortunately.
And I bet I know why. Honestly, I wonder why, guys. Could it be because, now hear me out, this is a far-fetched theory, but he was a serial killer in like the 70s or 80s or whatever. Could it be because he was, okay, like, just hear me out though, like, hear me out. Because he was white. These are not criminal masterminds. They are Caucasian males who got away simply because they were that. Caucasian, white, bread on toast, have an ass.
Which brings us to our next victim, which was Daryl Sampson, who disappeared on April 6, 1976. Now we're in a shorter cool down period time, which tends to happen with a lot of serial killers. We have that really long one, and then it slowly gets shorter and shorter because they get more and more impatient and more addicted to what they're doing. But at the age of 18, Daryl Sampson was invited into Gacy's home under the pretense of a construction job, but shortly after would be murdered by Gacy. Initially, it was believed that Daryl disappeared by running away, but after police entered Gacy's home, his body was found underneath the dining room. This is obviously later on, after they actually found out Gacy was a serial killer. But until they found that out, everyone thought that he just ran away. And the next victim, Randall Reffitt,
Honestly, a lot of cases that have missing childs in them like that, which he wasn't a child, I guess. Legally, he was an adult, but still. A lot of cases like that, they just play blame the runaway. They just sit and decide, did he have a history of running away? No. Well, we're just going to say it was a runaway because it makes our job simpler, and we're not going to investigate further, okay?
age 15, disappeared on May 14th, 1976. So now we're only like a month cooldown period. And he would also be discovered under the crawl space of Gacy's home during the police investigation after Gacy was caught. And his body would be identified via x-ray, and his cause of death would be a stab wound. And the next victim, Samuel Stapleton, was only 14 years old at the time of his disappearance. On May 13th, 1976, Samuel had just finished spending time at his sister's house and decided to walk back before his curfew. However, he would never make it home and was reported missing the next day. And his body would also be discovered under the crawl space of Gacy's home and identified by x-ray of his head that included his teeth. And his body was also found with a metal bracelet that his family and friends later identified as his, and this bracelet was actually used in charging Gacy with the death during his trial. And next, there was Michael Lawrence Bonin, who disappeared on June 3rd, 1976, at the age of 17. He was taken while traveling from Chicago to Waukegan, and his cause of death was strangulation via ligature. And his body was exhumed from...
It's definitely weird how a lot of killers have a signature MO or modus operandi where they kill their victims in a certain mannerism. It's almost ritualistic to them. It's almost obsessive. They have to do it or else they just can't control themselves. But with John Wayne Gacy, he is a unique case where he killed his victims in very unique mannerisms. And this is not an applause to him. He can go suck dicks in hell. But anyways, he just now killed that boy with a ligature, which is strangulation, which is a common theme with him. He has strangled quite a few of his victims, and it is genuinely disheartening. But as said previously, he had also stabbed and even beaten people to death, which is very intense and very disheartening for people who go through that. And it makes my heart hurt for them.
Beneath Gacy's spare bedroom. And next there was William Billy Carroll Jr., who was known to be kind of a troublemaker around town. According to his father William, quote unquote, when Billy was 14 or 15, he was caught with a .38 Smith & Wesson automatic pistol. According to what I've learned from some of his friends, he'd shoot it at people just to scare them. He used to like to watch them run. However, on his oldest brother's birthday, June 13th, 1976, 16-year-old William disappeared and was later discovered and identified in a shallow grave in the crawl space of Gacy's home via dental records on March 17th, 1979. And then...
That's genuinely a little scary. My birthday is close to that. My birthday is June 18th, not June 13th, but it's only 5 days off, which is terrible. That someone's best day of their life could also be somebody's worst. It could be a mother losing her child. It could be somebody having their 20th birthday. It's terrible. Every bad day is someone's birthday.
And there was James Jimmy Hakinson, who was actually recently identified on July 19th, 2017 via DNA match to his family, previously known as Body 24. Hakinson disappeared on August 5th, 1976 at the age of 16. And on the day he disappeared, Jimmy called his mother to let her know that he had arrived in Chicago after traveling from Minnesota from his home. And once Gacy was arrested, James' mother contacted the police stating that her son might be one of the unidentified victims. However, However, at the time, the police could only use dental records to identify bodies, and James' mother just happened to not have any. And it wasn't until his nephew told his father and aunt to submit their DNA to the Chicago PD, and that his body was then successfully identified. And the next victim would be Rick Johnson, aged 17, and he disappeared on June 8th, 1976. So all of these murders are happening very, very close together.
That is also something else that happens a lot with serial killers, especially ones of this variety. They tend to be very methodical, very far ahead planners. They think of everything, and then they just mess up, because as bad as it might sound, their first kill is never as good as their next one, and they constantly try to mimic that feeling, and it's genuinely just terrifying, because a desperate serial killer is one of the worst ones.
And he would disappear after his mother dropped him off at a concert. Not much is known about how Gacy and Rick met. However, we know that Rick died on August 6th, 1976, and his body was found inside the crawl space, buried over top of the body of James Hackinson. So at this point, he's just stacking bodies on top of each other under his floorboards while his family is living in the same home, and just going about his life how he always does, with being a clown, and then having his construction company, a construction company in which he found a lot of his victims. He would just tell them that they could have a job, and then he'd have them over, and then he'd do relatively the same thing over and over again, you know, either getting them drunk or handcuffing them, promising them jobs. It's just sick. And the fact that it took so long for them to find him is just awful. And then there is the next victim, Gregory Godzik. And there's little known about the disappearance of Gregory. All we know is that he went missing on December 11th, 1976, and he was exhumed from the crawl space of Gacy's home. And
December 11th is the birthday of my brother, actually, which is interesting. Okay, that's... I'm sorry, it was just something that popped into my head.
Investigators were able to place Greg in Gacy's home because his wallet and some of his other belongings were found there. And at age 19, John Sick had recently moved to Chicago and was eager to start a life. However, he went missing January 20th, 1977. And later, during police investigation, he would also be found in Gacy's crawl space. And then there was John Prestige, age 20, who had come to Chicago to visit a friend and eventually stayed after finding work with a Chicago contractor. And he would be last seen on March 15th, 1977, and his body would also be found in the crawl space. And I know I'm saying, you know, victim one after another, but I think it's important to speak on all of the victims. As shocking and as sickening as it is, I don't want to breeze past any of them. So next we have Matthew Bowman, who was last seen by his mother at a suburban train station and reported missing by his sister July 5th, 1977. And other than his body being found under the crawl space, not much is known about how he came into contact with Gacy or how he died. And then there was Robert Gilroy, the son of a Chicago police sergeant, and he had actually grown up just 4 blocks.
A bit off topic, just to kind of like counterbalance the morbidness of this video. They all have very big hair, which I guess was era appropriate, you know? They're all like very clean shaven with like big poofy hair. And you know, that's not really how my hair is. My hair's straight. Fuck. Ow.
Where Gacy lived, but investigators couldn't link any evidence as to whether that played a factor in his disappearance or death. And Robert was last seen September 15th, 1997. And unfortunately, his body would also be found under the crawl space at the age of 18. And then there was John Murray, who at age 19 completed an intense 18-month Marine training and enjoyed his time in Chicago with friends and family. And on the night of September 25th, 1977, he stopped by his family member's house and informed them that he was going out. However, according to his roommate, who worked for Gacy's construction company, his dog had been run over. And this claim would be corroborated by his girlfriend, who claimed that the last time the two had talked had been on the phone that night when Maury went missing. And following this incident, Maury would never be seen again. And when investigating his disappearance, his roommate was very adamant about not calling his missing roommate, which some believe meant that he knew that Gacy was responsible for Maury's disappearance, because that is very strange. And when investigators investigators ended up digging up Gacy's mass grave, John Mallory's body was among the deceased in the crawl space. And among the many items that were discovered in Gacy's home, Mallory's brown suede jacket was found and used as evidence to prosecute Gacy during his trial. And next would be Russell Nelson, who disappeared on October 17th, 1977, after traveling to Chicago with a friend to work for a contractor within Chicago metro area. And investigators would never figure out whether that contractor that Russell worked for was Gacy or not. And his body would be recovered from Gacy's crawl space, and he would be 21 at the time of his death. Next would be Robert Winch, who was the son of a physics professor at Kalamazoo, Michigan, where he would live for most of his life, and then he would move to Chicago at the age of 16. And while in Michigan, he was kind of known for running away from his foster home, so when he disappeared on November 11th, 1977, it wasn't that surprising. And he would be last seen eating at a McDonald's with a friend after being dropped off by his girlfriend. And while at McDonald's, he would be approached by John Wayne Gacy, offering him a contracting job. And he left the McDonald's with Gacy and was never seen again. And while investigators would later search Gacy's home, they would find his tiger's eye belt. Then there was Tommy Bowling, who was 20 years old at the time he disappeared on November 18th, 1977, and at the time he was struggling with drugs and had a wife and a 3-year-old son, and his body would be recovered under Gacy's crawl space as well. And the body of David Talsma would also be found in Gacy's crawl space and was identified by x-rays on his left arm on what would have been his 21st birthday. And his father reported him missing on December 14th, 1977. And next is William Wayne Kindred, a 19-year-old resident of 511 West Melrose Street, Chicago. And he was last seen near Diversey and Broadway, where police believed John Wayne Gacy picked him up. And Kindred's girlfriend, Mary Jo Paulus, had been searching for him tirelessly since his disappearance. But his body would be later found under Gacy's house in December 1978 and was identified through dental records provided by his mother. And then there would be Tim O'Rourke's body, who was actually recovered from Illinois River and was identified through fingerprints. And when his body was found, he was completely naked. And he disappeared sometime in mid-June 1978, and his age was unknown. So clearly something happened during that encounter where Gacy maybe couldn't get him back to his home, or some sort of ordeal happened where he had to kill him on the spot and then throw him into the river. And then the body of Frank William Landigan was discovered naked in the Des Plaines River in Will County on November 12th, 1978. And he was later linked to Gacy after his driver's license was found in Gacy's home. And then 20-year-old James Mazzara was found 3 miles away from Timothy O'Rourke in the Des Plaines River on December 28th, 1978. And not much is known about when Gacy came into contact with James, or when the first meeting was, or even when he went missing, but he was found nonetheless. Clearly, Gacy found a new dumping ground because he had so many bodies under his house. And the next victim is Robert Peast, a 15-year-old in Des Plaines, Illinois, who disappeared on December 11th, 1978. And he was last seen in Nissan Pharmacy, where he worked, telling his mother that he was going to meet a contractor for a potential job. We all know where he's going. Obviously identified later, the contractor being John Wayne Gacy. And when Robert obviously didn't return home, his family reported him missing. And his disappearance triggered an investigation that ultimately led to Gacy's arrest. And Robert's body would be found...
As sad as it is to say, his death was the salvation of probably a lot of people. If John Wayne Gacy was never caught, imagine where he'd be. Not today. I think he would have died by today. But imagine where he would have been in the past if he was never caught and that death never alerted anybody. He could have killed 20 more people, 40. Based on his current rate at that point in time, he was accelerating really fast. He was killing he was killing young men left and right. I just realized something. I didn't ask if I was okay to... Never mind. I doubt she'll even see this video. I doubt anybody sees this video. But yeah, it's genuinely disheartening to say that someone's death can be other salvations as to why should it have to come to that point. But I digress.
found April 9th, 1979, in the Des Plaines River. And Robert's blue nylon jacket was found inside Gacy's home, linking his death to Gacy. And all of those victims that we just covered are all the ones that have been successfully identified. To this day, there are still 7 unidentified victims that police are working diligently to identify. There were 8 unidentified victims found as well at his property. DNA from the scene was unable to be extracted from them, and they just continue to be unnamed. But Gacy's ability to maintain a double life during this period was remarkable. He continued to be an active member of his community, hosting large parties and participating in local politics, and his construction business was thriving during this whole time, providing him with both financial stability and a means to access potential victims. And the contrast between Gacy's public persona and his private actions was very stark, illustrating his capacity for manipulation and deception. And as years progressed, Gacy's crimes became increasingly brazen. He began to take greater risks, sometimes committing murders while other people were present in his home. And this escalation and risk-taking behavior would just ultimately contribute to his downfall. And despite his efforts to conceal his crimes, suspicion began to arise within his immediate circle. His second wife, Carol Huff, reported finding wallets belonging to young men in their home and noticing a peculiar odor emanating from the crawl space. How the fuck could you not smell like 20-30 bodies under your floorboards? I'm assuming she had her nose cauterized or so. I don't understand how you could just be like.
It's genuinely a weird question to ask about how she couldn't have known about her husband's dealings within the murders, because John Wayne Gacy was a manipulator. He was easily able to charm people into getting his way and to just manipulate people, and that's what made him so dangerous, especially to his victims.
It's probably nothing. It's probably just I forgot to do the laundry or something. I don't know. I don't even know how Gacy would play that off. Like, he would just say that he was, I don't know, refusing to shower for years and just blaming it on his own fucking disgusting body odor or something. I don't know. I don't know. I don't understand how that's even possible, but I digress. But it says that every time she brought it up, Gacy would just somehow explain it away. So I can't think of anything else. He's like, oh, there's mold in the walls. And she's like, shouldn't we move? And he's like, no! We can't. So the turning point came in December 1978 when the disappearance of 15-year-old Robert Piest was linked to Gacy. Piest had last been seen at the pharmacy where Gacy had been working, and witnesses reported that Gacy had offered him a job. And this disappearance would trigger a much more thorough investigation into Gacy's activities, ultimately leading to the discovery of the horrific extent of his crimes. So the disappearance of Robert on December 11th, 1978 marked the beginning of the end for John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown. So police would obviously go to Gacy's home, and the police would scrutinize Gacy, and they would uncover a series of suspicious items that raised alarms, to say the least. And these included items belonging to missing young men, as well as peculiar objects that seemed out of place in a suburban household. And the mounting evidence against Gacy led to the implementation of round-the-clock surveillance on his residence. So under the weight of constant police scrutiny, Gacy's behavior became increasingly erratic. His attempts to maintain the facade of normalcy began to crumble as the pressure intensified. And on December 21st, 1978, the investigation reached a critical turning point when Gacy, unable to withstand the mounting pressure, made a shocking confession to police. He admitted to killing at least 30 men, quote unquote. A revelation that stunned even the most seasoned investigators. Because everybody around Gacy, they thought he was the coolest guy. So nice, very professional, you know, very successful, great family. How could this guy be a murderer? It basically shook Chicago. Then there was the grim task of excavating Gacy's property, which began on December 22nd, 1978. And over the course of a week, forensic teams meticulously searched the crawl space beneath Gacy's home, uncovering a horrifying scene, as you already know. And the excavation revealed dozens of decomposing bodies, confirming the extent of Gacy's murderous spree. And the process of recovering and identifying the remains was painstaking and emotionally taxing for all involved. And if we take a look at this house, it is just truly haunting. Investigators dug into his yard and realized just how many of his victims he was literally standing above at all times, which I'm sure was just a weird fucking treasure trove.
Revisiting crime scenes and murder sites and dump sites is very important to a lot of serial killers, as it makes them relive the kill, lets them relish in it, and it's a control thing that a lot of narcissists use, and I have to say that they are just little bitches. That's it.
For him, it is sick, just a sick bastard. I hate this guy. It's just sick, especially with his family living on that in the house too. Oh, makes me sick. And he lived at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue, Chicago, Illinois. And this place became a burial site for all the victims I listed. So when investigating his home, the crawl space housed 26 bodies beneath it. And they also found a body under the garage and one in the yard. And I mean, at this point, he was literally collecting them. Not only killing them in his home, but burying them in his home. It's like he had this possession over these bodies. It was just sick. And despite the extensive efforts of forensic experts and law enforcement, several of Gacy's victims remain unidentified, as we said. And this tragic reality underscored the far-reaching impact of his crimes and the challenges faced by investigators in bringing closure to the afflicted families. And the magnitude of Gacy's crimes became fully apparent when he was formally charged with 33 counts of murder, one of the highest numbers in the United States criminal history. And the trial, which began in 1980, captivated the nation and shed light on the dark underbelly of a seemingly ordinary suburban life. And Gacy's defense team attempted to mount an insanity plea, which is insanity, arguing that their client was not in control of his actions at the time of the murders. However, the strategy quickly unraveled as expert testimony consistently ruled that Gacy was sane and fully aware of the nature of his consequences of his actions. I mean, you're talking about a guy that could like fully function and have a full business, own a business, run a business, have a family, be well liked by everyone around them, like have nothing seemingly mentally wrong with them, and then they try to get the insanity plea. It's just, it just makes me hate defense attorneys. I don't hate them all, but I mean, let's not get into that, but they should kind of be in jail too. Anyway, Gacy's attorney, that is. And the prosecution presented a mountain of physical evidence and testimony that painted a clear picture of Gacy's methodical and calculated approach to his crimes, because every one of these crimes was so thought out and premeditated. Like, you couldn't argue it. And the jury, having heard weeks of gruesome testimony and examined the overwhelming evidence, required less than 2 hours of deliberation to reach their verdict. And on March 13th, 1980, John Wayne Gacy was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death for his heinous crimes. Whether you agree with that or not, I'm not upset about it. And following his conviction, Gacy spent the next 14 years on death row. So he had to rot a little bit, which I also like. And during this time, he granted numerous interviews, maintaining his innocence in later years despite his earlier confessions. So the guy just wanted attention, because he's a little attention whore. He's a little creepy clown attention whore bitch. And it's weird to see some of the interviews because it has him having all the documents of his known victims and being able to look at them, and also in confident state that he has no recollection of any of them, when you know he remembers every single one of their faces and everything that he did to them. It's just, he has a very punchable face during his interviews. But the final chapter of John Wayne Gacy's life unfolded on May 10th, 1994, when he was executed by lethal injection. Womp womp. And witnesses to the execution reported a disturbing scene describing what appeared to be a botched procedure, which I just call karma. The chemicals used in the lethal injection process reportedly caused Gacy to experience prolonged suffering, raising questions about the humanness of the execution method.
Hey, I'm not upset about that in the slightest. Like, I mean, like, pop off. Honestly, like, that's all I'm saying. Just, like, if you want to make it hurt, just, like, let it hurt a little bit. That's all.
Which, you know, is fair. You know, I mean, he's a monster. That doesn't mean we, the innocent people, need to be monsters. But maybe it was an accident. And if it was an accident, listen, who the cares? You know, he killed 33 people. In his final moments, though, Gacy remained defiant and unrepentant, which just makes it like I just don't feel bad for him. I don't feel bad for him, like even a little bit. And his last words would be, quote unquote, "Kiss my ass." Well, karma kissed yours, you piece of shit. But it was just his final act of contempt towards society and his victims, revealing that even in death he showed no remorse for his actions, and now he's just rotting in the deepest depths of hell, burning every second of every day and every night, and I sleep well at night knowing that. But I digress. Gacy's psychological profile revealed a complex tapestry of disorders and motivations, because I do like to get into that, like how the hell does somebody become this? How do people commit these crimes and just go about their lives like nothing ever happened? His behavior exhibited strong narcissistic personality traits, evident in his manipulation of both the police and media throughout the investigation.
I would definitely say don't make yourself go crazy thinking about what makes these killers tick, because it's definitely more complicated than just he wanted to kill.
In the trial. And this narcissism was even further exemplified by his lack of remorse, as he shows no empathy for his victims and even mocked their families at some points. And the question of whether Gacy suffered from dissociative identity disorder, or DID, remained contentious, as he inconsistently claimed to have multiple personalities at various points during and after the trial. I feel like that was just the defense trying to say that he was insane, and this was just like a way of trying to manipulate the jury, which is just, you're not fooling me, buddy. You're dead. Who am I talking to? Not you, because you're down there. Anyway, and the motivations behind Gacy's crimes were just multifaceted. Extending beyond mere sexual gratification, his actions were deeply rooted in a desire for power and control. And the act of his victims begging for their lives before killing them served to reinforce his sense of dominance, something that he didn't have as a child when his father was dominating him, which I do think coincides with how he went about killing people. But this need for control may have also stemmed from his internal conflicts, particularly regarding his sexuality.
As I said, he was a control freak who needed to know where the body was at all times. He needed to have full control over them at all times. Being able to relish in his killings is something that was very important to him, especially as a narcissist.
As well, which I'm sure is a factor. And despite being married twice, Gacy primarily targeted young men, leading some experts to theorize that he struggled with repressed homosexual urges, which may have fueled his rage and violent tendencies. And the Gacy case also led to significant reforms in law enforcement procedures, particularly handling cases of missing persons. The removal of the 72-hour waiting period for reporting missing children was incorporated into the Missing Child Recovery Act of 1984, ultimately contributing to the establishment of the Amber Alert system, which, again, just a positive out of something so huge and negative. But a 72-hour waiting period is fucking crazy. Like, even back then, like that, I can't even, what? Like, I know a lot of kids ran away, but my lord. My lord. But Gacy's crimes had a lasting impact on criminal profiling techniques.
Most kidnapping victims don't last 24 hours, which is terrifying, and you have to wait 48 before reporting somebody missing concurrently. It's just a very interesting
Techniques highlighting the importance of understanding the psychological profiles of serial killers. And the FBI and other law enforcement agencies have since developed more sophisticated methods of identifying and tracking potential serial offenders. And these advancements draw on insights gained from analyzing Gacy's behavior and his modus operandi, or MO, contributing to the evolution of investigative practices in the field of criminal psychology. But all in all, giant piece of shit that I am glad is not breathing the same oxygen as all you beautiful babies. All my beautiful babies. I just want you to be safe. I want you to be safe out there. But that is all for the John Wayne Gacy case, the killer clown case. You guys want.
Okay, so that was the end of that whole thing. So that will be the end of this, unfortunately. But don't worry, that's not the last you'll be seeing of me, hopefully. unless I like get run over by a bus. Anyways, what happened there was genuinely terrible for the victims, for the family of the victims. It was genuinely terrible for the time period, honestly. And as she said, something good actually came out of it, which is very positive. I'm sorry, which was very positive. The Amber Alert system. And as I said, having to wait 48 hours before considering somebody missing is very dangerous in my opinion. And I can understand how, like, it could seem that, like, well, what if they're just, like, out somewhere or something? Like, it's all very complicated, okay? So, with that being said, I love you all, and I hope you ants have a great day. Goodbye.